In this video, we're going to take a look at playback options with MagicQ. And this is changing things like the default fader function, things like changing it to control size and speed of effects. And we're also going to look at things like default cue stacks, blind mode, and clearing the programmer with some different options as well. So let's start off by looking at fader functions. We're going to select our spots and locate them, which has put all attributes for the spots into the programmer at their locate value. We're now going to choose a color red and record that onto playback 1. We're going to choose another color green and record that onto playback 2. And another color blue and record that onto playback 3. I've not cleared the programmer in between recording these cues, so I've got all attributes for my fixtures in each one of the cues, but just changing the color between them. I'm now going to label these cues red, green and blue on each one of the playbacks, just so I know what's on them. And once I've finished labeling them, we'll just test and prove that they play back as expected. So I've got red in playback 1, green playback 2, blue in playback 3. The default function for any playback fader in normal live mode for MagicQ is that the fader will control dimmer channels only. So a dimmer channel in MagicQ is classed as a HTP attribute, a highest takes precedence attribute. And you'll notice that as I bring up the fader, it does exactly that. It controls the dimmer. As soon as I bring a fader off 0, the LTP attributes straight away go to their value. So the colour in playback 2, for example, has gone to green instantly, and the fader controls the dimmer level. Now what happens if I've got playback 1 at full, active already, the dimmer's at full? In playback 2, where I've got the colour green, as I bring the fader off 0, the dimmer value is already at full. So it doesn't change. The highest thing for the dimmer takes precedence, takes priority. But the colour channel is called an LTP attribute. And LTP attributes in MagicQ are position, colour or beam attributes. Any attributes that fall under those categories. So pan, tilt, red, green, blue, gobo, zoom and so on there would be LTP attributes. The default for the faders is that they only control HTP attributes. So as soon as you bring or activate a playback, so bring the fader off 0, the LTP attributes will snap to their value. The latest takes precedence, so they'll take priority then. So I can say straight away, as soon as I bring up playback 3, the latest thing for colour, because that's the only change in these cues, takes precedence. So you can see they snap to blue. If I bring down playback 2 again and up, it snaps to green. Now in a live show environment, that's not particularly subtle if you want to use playbacks to change the colour of your fixtures. So you can change what the fader is controlling. I'm just going to release playbacks 2 and 3. If you triple click the select button above playback number 2, or you can double or triple click on the legend, and this takes you into your cue stack options. Under cue stack options, if you go to fader, you can see what the fader is controlling by default. By default, fader is controlling HTP channels. You can change it so that the fader controls LTP channels as well. Double click and select yes. I'm going to do the same on playback number 3. Double click and select yes. And you'll see in the tooltip below it gives you a more detailed explanation for this as well. So I've set fader controls LTP channels as well as leaving the default of HTP channels on as well. You can mix these options for both playbacks 2 and 3. You'll now notice as I bring up playback number 2, it fades in the colour. So the colour still works on an LTP basis, latest takes precedence, but the fader is now controlling that transition to that later or latest change. And you can see as I bring down playback number 2, it'll go on an LTP basis, but the fader's controlling that transition. If I bring down playback 1 and just leave up playback number 3, I'm bringing down 3 then as well, and bring it up, you can see the fader is controlling both HTP and LTP. So it's going from the green to the blue as I bring the fader up and down there and controlling dimmer. So that's fader controlling HTP and LTP channels. We can also have our fader controlling effects size and speed. Earlier we recorded a circle for our spots onto playback number 10. Again, triple clicking the select button or on the legend takes us into cue stack options. Under the fader tab we can see the default fader controls HTP. As I bring that fader up off 0, you'll notice the colour snaps in and the effect starts running at full speed and full size the moment the fader is off 0. And then dimmer control on the fader. We could change that and we can say in the cue stack options for fader fader now controls effect size and speed. You can set these options independently, so you could have the fader just controlling size only or speed only for effect in that playback. It's only going to affect things in this particular playback. So different to group masters, which are global, controlling all playbacks using an effect for a particular group of fixtures. In this case, we're just saying the effect in this playback only. And now as I bring that fader up, you can see it's controlling the dimmer, but you can see in my effect there, it's got size and speed control as I bring the fader up to run the effect at full size and speed as the fader hits full. So that's in different modes of control for your playback faders. Let's just go back to playbacks 1 to 3 and turn our fader function back to the default of fader controls HTP yes and LTP no. And look at our flash buttons. You'll notice in a normal way, when you hit a flash button for your fader, it brings on that cue. It's not a toggle by default, it's a press and hold. You can change that to a toggle under your Q stack options again. Triple clicking your select button under view options, under buttons, you could set your flash button to toggle if you like. And now your flash button on that particular playback is a toggle on and off. You'll notice that the intensity hasn't come on at that point because the fader is still at 0 and I've set the fader to control HTP channels. So if I release that playback here, I can use this flash button as a toggle to toggle on and off the playback. Bring the fader down and it still activates, but fader controls HTP and the fader's at 0. Another function to look at here is what add and swap do. Above your Grandmaster fader, you've got an add swap button. You'll notice it changes the colour of your flash keys, both on the PC software and a console, from green to red. It changes the mode of your flash buttons from either add or swap mode. Let's record something with some different fixtures. Let's say our wash fixtures. Let's locate them and have them in green. And let's tilt them onto the back wall. If we record that as a cue on playback 5 and clear our programmer. In normal add mode, if I've got my spots in red and I press the flash button for playback number 5, it will add to whatever is being output from my console. So a bit like just running the playback up. You can see the wash lights come on. If I change the add swap mode for my flash keys here to swap mode, flash buttons turn red, you'll notice that as I press a flash key, it now temporarily brings to 0 any other playbacks that are running and only outputs the one that I'm holding the flash key on. So again, that would work if I've got my spots doing the effect there. I've now got 2 playbacks with the spots active, but if I hit my playback 5 here, which is the wash lights, it temporarily brings both of those to 0 while I'm holding that flash button until I release it. A typical use case here might be things like a strobe cue. When you hit your strobe cue, that flash button, you want everything else in your rig to go to 0. But if I go back to add mode, things like blinders around my stage, I want to add those to a look. I don't want the stage lights to go off when I flash the blinders on the front of my stage. You can set this on a per playback basis. Again, in your Q stack options, triple click your select button, and you've got an option here for your flash button to always swap. So you can see here, flash always swaps. If I change that to yes, you can see just playback 5's flash button has turned red. The others are still green. So this one would swap. Anything else, I've got a dimmer effect playback here, would add to the look. So that's some more playback options. We're going to now look at default Q stacks. Default Q stacks are something that would appear on every single playback page where you've not got a playback recorded. A typical use case for this might be a rock and roll show where maybe you've got one main Q stack for each song, and then on your other 9 playbacks, you might record things of specials, maybe things like blinders, strobes, and so on. And you don't have to record those onto each playback page, but you're going to change page to move through your master Q stack. So maybe playback 1 is your master Q stack of Qs. In my case, I've only got 1 Q. As I change to page 2, I'm just going to release playback 10. You would expect that you now see an empty row of playbacks because there's nothing there at the moment. If I now go on and record a cue there, so let's locate them, say spots in magenta, record onto playback 1, let's set a name, let's call it spots magenta, clear my programmer, you'd expect that as I change page, there you go, you see the Q stack recorded there. But you'll also notice when I change page, all my other playbacks disappear because, again, there's nothing for those playbacks on page 2. What I can do is I can say, where there's not something already recorded on a playback position, when I change page, keep showing me the items from page 1. A default playback can only be set if it starts and originates on playback page 1. So the playbacks that are on page 1 you can have appear on other pages, but you can't do that backwards from other pages. So you can't say an item on page 2 is default and holds over to other pages. To set a default playback, you go to your playbacks window, and inside the playbacks window, on your D encoder on the bottom left, you'll see an option for default queue stack. You simply press the S key of the playback you want to hold over or want to be default, and you toggle it on, and it will now say DEF in the legend. So I can select playback 3 as well, playback 5, and I'm going to leave playbacks 8, 9 and 10 as normal. You'll now notice when I change page, playbacks 2, 3 and 5 have held over. They're now default because there's nothing on those pages, they now appear. So as I move and step through different pages, always playbacks 2, 3 and 5 are showing on those pages. So my specials there hold over. Now you can still use those playbacks if you want to. So in a particular song, if you say, look, I'm never going to use the strobes here, so I want to use that playback for something else, well, you can just record to it and it'll work as a normal playback. The default playback will go around it then. So on page 2, I've recorded something. Page 3, it appears again because there's nothing on that particular playback. Another programming option to look at is blind mode and clearing the programmer. In a previous video in this series, we looked at using blind mode when updating queues. Blind mode can also be used in a live environment to allow you to build the lookup and then output. So by toggling on blind mode over here, inhibits my programmer from outputting. So I could say spots, select, locate, because I'm in blind mode, it doesn't output from the console, in green, in a position with this gobo, and when I press the blind button, it outputs my programmer. Now you can come in and out of blind mode with time. So I could say over 3 seconds, go into blind mode, stops the programmer outputting. Now maybe I've already got my spots doing something. Maybe I've already got them in red on a playback. And I now have built this lookup with the spots in green with a gobo in a different position in the programmer. And in the middle of my show, I've not recorded that as a cue, but I just want to output that. So I can toggle out of blind mode, but again, I can do that with time. 3, blind, and toggle out of blind mode over 3 seconds, as you can see happening in my visualizer. Now I want to go back to what the playback is doing, but I don't want to go back into blind mode. I want to just clear the programmer. By pressing clear normally, you would snap out of anything out of the programmer, it just empties the programmer with no time. If you type a number on your keypad, let's say 3, and select clear, will clear my programmer over that time. So there's some more playback options. In the next video, we're going to look at some more queue stack options.